This week in Erotic Awakening, monogamy in this economy, first-time event, and more.
Welcome to Erotic Awakening, an exploration of all things erotic. If you are offended by adult topics or prohibited by law, we recommend you stop listening right now.
We want to thank all of our patron supporters.
Head over to patreon.com/Erotic Awakening today and get your bonus content and support the show.
Hi, Dawn.
Hi, Dan.
Dawn, you and I have done the polyamory thing for a lot of years now. Holy cats, many years.
Many years that we can actually say decades at this point.
And I clearly recall one of the advantages the last time we had a multiple living situation was the fact that we had multiple incomes. Yeah.
Incomes, puppy babysitter.
All kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, it just so happens that you and I are going to give it another try. We are going to be in a situation where we have a third person that becomes someone we're cohabitating with. We're going to create some kind of a tribe. And I kind of forget how to do that. Do you have any clues? Do you remember how we put that together?
I'm in my upper 50s. No, I do not remember. I'm just kidding. I remember some logistics, but things change. This is a whole different environment. This is a whole different setup.
And a whole different person.
And a whole different person.
So first off, we've got that person. Minkari, thanks for being on the podcast, and thanks for agreeing to live with us.
Thanks for having me. Both ways, or all the ways. That sounded naughty. And I meant it to be naughty.
But even also, he says in perfect English, we are lucky to have Laura Boyle on the podcast today. Laura recently published a book called Monogamy in This Economy, talking all about finances and child rearing and all the other things that can benefit and be a positive aspect of being in a polyamorous relationship. But it's more about how do you actually do that? How do you create this household in a society that's built for monogamy? Laura, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, guys. So I ended up writing this book because as someone who has lived in a multi-person household before and as a relationship coach who works with lots of non-monogamous people, I get out of younger folks who are sort of looking forward to their polyamorous lives, lots of them worrying that like maybe they can't have this life that they'd envisioned because they have multiple partners, but still want to do the like life of raising children and whatever. And they sort of view that as more difficult because they're trying to simultaneously live according to their values that to them involve a more free and open way of loving multiple people. And so I conducted a survey and asked all of the folks who I could find via myself and many other people online sharing my survey who are living in households with 3 or more adults in them to sort of share with me their experiences of how they were making this work. And I got almost 500 people to answer my survey and then more than 150 of them to do follow-up interviews with me, either by Zoom calls or by email or a combination of the two. And I condensed all of this information that folks shared with me into this handy little book that, as you said, I called Monogamy in This Economy because the joke sells better. And also because for some people, one of the benefits is saving a little bit of money. And it's all about the kind of mistakes you might make, but also things you might find really handy in terms of conversations that might help when you're setting up a non-monogamous household or great benefits you might find when you do so.
150 people that you were able to follow up with.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. So that tells me that there's a lot of people doing this, if that's just how many you were able to find with the platforms that we have.
Yeah, I mean, well, so studies have shown that about 5% of North American adults are in some kind of non-monogamous relationship, right? So that's about 10 million people in the US. So
Wow.
It's not actually that many people to then think, I mean, I know by no means any majority of us are willing to be open enough to then live in households where there were 3 or more of us living together. So that's already a smaller subset than that by a lot. But even on top of that, like just from my life, having been someone who lived in a V for a while, and that's when I had my kids, that's the household that we started raising our kids in, and I still co-parent with those people, even though I've had a breakup and now we live in 2 homes. And I have a lot of friends who are also polyamorous parents, some of whom cohabit in households that are larger numbers of adults and some of whom don't. So there are a lot of us, and I have the impression from my social circle and my work that we are growing in number over time. So
Mhm.
it's this situation where, as mainstream acceptance is growing, people are more and more willing to be out and talk about the lives they're leading, which I think makes now a better time for getting more information from folks.
Nice.
So let's get into the brass tacks of it. So
Mm.
for Minkari and Dawn and Dan, who said, "Hey, we're going to be a cohabitating group of humans," what do we need to know? What are the gotchas that people may not be expecting?
Well, so I think for one thing, you guys are well set up for success in that the groups that stayed together the longest were almost all made of 3 people and not some larger group. So you're statistically well set up.
Okay.
And then on top of that, the biggest things that carried throughout topics were being willing to have and revisit conversations and agreements. So, whatever agreements you guys make among yourselves just have to suit whatever needs and boundaries you actually have. So, there isn't some better or like superior way of organizing what you decide to do with your finances or where you decide to sleep or how or whatever. But once you decide and you move in together, you have to be willing to say, 8 weeks in or 12 weeks in, we've been trying this. And actually, I'm a little uncomfortable. Dawn, you do this cleaning thing in a way that I didn't expect. And actually, I don't like it that you wipe down the counter with a rag after you're done doing the dishes. I think we should do it with a sponge instead. Right.
Mhm.
And then you have the little fight about it
Hmm.
and revisit it. Make it a conversation rather than a silent resentment or a fight, and readdress these tiny little everyday details. Studies, which largely were done on monogamous people but do carry over into polyamorous households as well, show that everyday things like chores and the equal distribution, or equitable rather, distribution of how folks do these everyday things are the biggest problem for folks moving in together, and being willing to, like, ahead of a move in or very shortly after a move in, create what is an equitable distribution for you guys, and then be willing to readjust them in a check in after a short but long enough that you have a realistic sense of what's going on. So different people gave different amounts of time, but somewhere in that 8 to 12-week range tends to be a sweet spot for people.
Okay.
It's long enough that you actually get to trial it, but not so long that it's crazy. And doing check-ins at those kind of intervals tends to help people. Chores are one of the big pitfalls. Finances are another. Even monogamous couples tend to be keeping their money more separate these days. So being willing to do that, but then have the bigger discussions around, but how are we combining the bills that we're combining if we're keeping our finances separate? Who's sending money when, or writing checks when and how, and where are we keeping track of them? It's choosing which headaches matter and who's willing to have them
Hmm.
and what feels most important to you. The biggest message, as in all of polyamory, is that it's customizable and you have to decide which things you're willing to have a headache and talk more about.
But
Shocking, I know.
for those that, because this is not going on video, Laura just
I know,
gave
I'm
that to us
sorry.
as
I
kind of a
live with
secret.
sight gags.
Live
I
right
can't
back to the
help
third. It's a
it.
wonderful sight gag. Minkari, what do you got?
Conversations about equitable contribution begin in that with finances and with domestic labor, but then also living on the road. That has another set of labor that, Daniel Bellum handles things like the Blackwater tank and such like that. You do that, right? I'm just assuming that that's your job and not mine or Dawn's. But
We
how
might
does
we might be able to renegotiate that according to what I've heard so far.
right? And so how do conversations, do you have any tips for that of what is successful to other polycules that live together on determining, first of all, like what is equitable contribution, right? Because balance doesn't mean same.
Right. So people have to decide among themselves whether particular chores The thing that seemed to come up very often in different people discussing their ways of figuring that out were that making assignments such that if there were tasks that anyone actually loved, they got to assign those first. Very few people have true love of certain chores, but every once in a while you find one where, like, no, for someone doing the dishes really is their meditative time and they want to do it. I once had a roommate who was like that. Like, that was just absolutely true for them. But for most of us, nothing is actually like a chore we desperately love. But then you get into, okay, but what is the most difficult thing? What is the biggest thing or the most hated thing or the whatever? And you start assigning those more points or more weight. And you divide things among yourselves so that it feels fair. And you will run into the problem where everyone, this is just a real human bias, feels like their own contributions are bigger than other people's. So if each of you is going to make a list where you're sort of mentally ranking how much you do each week, you're going to rank your own contributions higher than everyone else's. So doing a personalized version of the techniques that are found in like Eve Rodsky's Fair Play system, for example, instead of having a standard, like the Fair Play system is basically a standardized list of all the things it takes to keep a household running. And then it adds in the idea of every adult human deserves free time and time to work on the things that keep your like passions running, your personal projects running, and that every week you're required to take some amount of leisure time and some amount of time for a passion project. And so if you create a personal household version of that and you make a list of the things that really keep your household running, for each household, they'll be a little different. For example, in your household that's on the road, you're going to have slightly different maintenance needs than a house that's on totally connected to city lines for everything versus a household that's got like septic and a well that has certain seasonal needs that need meeting, right? And then you can figure out, one of the big things that came up in the book over and over again was that you'd have households where there were like very traditional division of labor where like men would do outdoor tasks, and at certain times of year they'd have higher levels of stuff they had to do than others depending on climate, or where based on climate and the amount of sort of yard the house had accrued, there wasn't as much that they were doing. And so then partners felt like it wasn't as fair a division. And so breaking it down in a full list meant that folks then could redivide things so that it came back to closer to a balance, or that the lack of balance didn't get noted until you were also adding in, well, now we're going on dates that are outside of the home, and we're noting where this time is going otherwise, because all of our remaining time isn't spent together. And it becomes an issue again when you become like a triad or a quad who are all living together, and you start noticing, oh, well, two of us are spending an awful lot of time keeping the house really nice. And the other one, well, comes back and sort of flips things upside down and does some nice things in the yard once in a while.
I'll take that role.
Well, I was going to say, even though we're going to be talking a lot, we also have the benefit of power exchange being thrown in there. At
Right.
some point, Dan's going to go, you're doing this and you're doing that. And I heard you, but.
Fair.
Right. And it can be more complicated by a DS dynamic, or you can work it into the DS dynamic where, like, as an element of service, the S-type can be doing some of these jobs that the D-type doesn't want to do as a service to them that gives them something extra, or the D-type can, in a way of helping the S-type grow through learning some new task that they didn't know how to do before, teach them how to do some of the maintenance work that they didn't know how to do, for example. And then you can be learning together to do something cool, right? Like,
Yeah,
these are
I
different ways that
absolutely,
you can nurture through something, right?
absolutely see that going on. So I do have another question for you. Was there a lot of talk in there about, or any talk in there about like property ownership And because there would be a lot of that going on, and how they dealt with that, because
Hmm.
different people are going to be coming in with different ownerships of material goods. So was there legalities that they looked at?
So, yes, but because it varied so much location by location,
Mm-hmm.
the best advice that I can give folks in short form is to talk closely with your partners and seek legal advisement if you're hoping to get a third party or more onto property that you already own, right? It
Mm-hmm.
is possible. It is not that hard, but it varies slightly depending on where you live and by what means you're intending to do it. If you're having someone live with you, making sure that they have a lease or a sublease if you're not intending to have them have equity in the home, but they're going to be living with you long term, just so that there's a record of them having lived somewhere so that they're not losing like coverage in terms of like when they want to move somewhere else, having rental history is a positive, right? Just in that sort of
Yeah.
covering our own butts and caring for one another kind of way
Hmm.
is important.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also one of my unpopular, but I think it's important opinions is that we do have to, in the interest of caring for one another, plan that even if our relationships don't last forever, we're going to have caring breakups and not bad breakups. And part of how we do that is by doing these covering for ourselves things,
Mm-hmm.
like having paperwork in place, like having a savings account that covers the move out costs of someone if someone is moving out. If
Hmm.
we've all bought a house together, it should be enough that there's enough to buy out the equity of one of the people if it's a chance that there will be a breakup and one person's equity needs to be bought out. If it's a matter of there's one person renting from other people, it should be about what a moving truck and first and last month's rent costs in your area.
Yeah.
Right? And I understand that that's a lot of money. And so it's not like you need to put that in the day you move in, but it's like have a savings account and put a little bit away all the time. And then if it's something that you aren't using and you've hit an age where, oh, now we've been together for 20 years and we're happily retired, take yourselves on a nice vacation.
Right. Right. So, and I know one of the other things that was heavy on our minds when we moved in with Dan's other partner years ago,
Hmm.
what because we're all getting older and we've had friends pass unexpectedly. You know, it's not just about moving out and making decisions like that. It's about things happening and someone's gone.
Yeah.
Yep.
It-
So-
Apple Power's paperwork is very valuable to have. Mm-hmm.
Well, one last question for you, if you don't mind. And this is probably, I'm sure that this was very well regarded in the book and it
Uh-oh.
must be well reflected because it's certainly important. When it comes to be about 5:30 and everybody is sitting on the couch, and who gets to control the remote and pick what we're watching?
That is a very household by household decision. It honestly depends on how much 2 out of 3 of you can gang up on the other one, probably. But
Okay, that's a pretty legitimate answer.
I don't know any household where the answer isn't like the thing that 2 out of the 3 of you want to watch.
Yeah.
But
Fair.
we'll see. In some households, I'm sure somebody rules the remote with an iron fist. I've just never been in one.
It's funny that no one can ever find the remote except for me, and it's just coincidental. The
Oh,
book
so in
is
your house, clearly you rule the remote with the iron fist.
Oh,
just
no,
exactly.
it's fine.
purely coincidental. The book is
Mhm.
Monogamy in This Economy, Finance, Child Rearing, and Other Practical Concerns of Polyamory. Where can people go find this book?
You can find it on Amazon, on bookshop.org. The links are on my website, readyforpolyamory.com. So go check it out. I hope you all enjoy it a lot.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Hang out uncomfortably with us for a few moments while we wrap this thing up. Dawn, there's a variety of places where we could look for that book. For example,
Midwest Leather Kink Alliance Weekend in Kansas City in October.
or Apex in Phoenix in November.
EV in Phoenix in November.
IK in St. Louis in November.
Kink School. Oh, they can't do it online, but we have Kink School online in November.
Naughty Revival in Minnesota in December.
And Apex in December in Phoenix.
All of these places are places that you might find. I don't know if you'll find the book, but you certainly will find us presenting, doing classes, and sharing. Keep up with all of our events, book news, and discounts and more
via the Erotic Awakening newsletter.
And get your EA shout out like Show from Ohio.
Head over to eroticawakening.com and subscribe today.
So, Dawn, you and I have been very fortunate, and I say fortunate with big quotation marks, but really it was fortunate. We have twice set up, actually 3 times set up large events from scratch, but we have never set up a kink event from scratch.
Right. Ours did not have a dungeon, so a little less complications there.
A lot less complications. Upcoming next is we have this wonderful interview about how you do that. How do you start from nothing and create your first full hotel event? So, Dawn, we've been very fortunate that we have gotten to run a couple of events from the beginning to the end, brand new events.
Yeah.
But we haven't run either a hotel takeover or a kink event.
That is true.
And I remember when Barrick first said, I'm going to run a kink event, I said, you are crazy, man. Why would anyone do that?
Well, now we're talking to another crazy man.
Apparently, today on the podcast, we're speaking with Keith, who is both the treasurer and project manager of a brand new hotel takeover event called Exploration Into Kink. Keith, thanks for being on the podcast.
I appreciate you having me on.
So the first question that comes to mind is why? As you already know at this point, it is a lot of work and you're just getting started. What was the impetus to run a hotel takeover kink event?
So the St. Louis community used to have one, and for reasons that always happens throughout the country, they had to stop. So my leather brother, John, Papa Bear, he was like, I really miss these events. We were running Flog, which was a monthly play party and social. And he was like, I really miss the big events because of the bonding, there's just something special about spending an entire weekend in kink versus just your local munch or your weekend play party. So he was like, I'm going to do it. And then he turned to me and I was like, well, I guess I'm along for the ride.
Well, there you go. And what's been the biggest surprise so far?
The biggest surprise so far is, so we're on a very short timetable. Most of the time when you're doing hotel takeovers or any event, you like to have 15 months or so. We have it compressed down to 9. My biggest surprise is how quickly things can come together and all the things that you're surprised that you don't know.
The things you don't know until you figure out you don't know.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Like, for example, we were having a meeting the other day and we're like, well, what happens if somebody has a medical emergency? We have a lot of medical professionals. We know to call 911, make sure whoever is safe and being taken care of until the professionals can get there. But what does that process actually look like?
Right. Yeah.
Explorations into Kink, I assume because of the title, is going to have a place.
It is. We are going to have a 7,500 square foot dungeon. It is separated into 4 sections. So we'll have our main dungeon area where the music will be thumping. We'll have a medical play area. We will have we call it a quiet dungeon. It is a less sensory. So the music isn't as loud, but you can still hear it. And then we also have a dedicated little space.
I love the different types of space, but so with a dungeon that big in a brand new event, where are you going to get the furniture?
So some of it we already have because we were running Flog has been around since 1997.
Okay.
Awesome.
So we have furniture from that. We're borrowing furniture from the House of Two Wolves, as well as a few other places, as well as purchasing and building additional.
Yeah. And that's one of the big things about a party this size is you have to come up with a lot of equipment. And then you've got a lot of equipment for the next 11 months to hang out. Very
Yes,
cool.
but it's fantastic.
Have you had trouble coming up with a staff?
So John picked the staff and he's done a fantastic job with it. he has focused on certain aspects that he was looking for, and everyone on the team has come through. Some people haven't had a lot to do yet, but once it's their turn, because like our volunteer coordinator, nothing
Right.
really to do a couple months out. However,
Right.
that weekend,
That
uh,
weekend, they are on while other people's jobs have just wound down.
yep. But I also know that they're going to step up and they're going to be amazing.
Absolutely. So how many people are you thinking for this event?
We are hoping for
Mhm.
500 or more.
Okay.
Nice. Nice, nice. That's a good size event.
Yeah, absolutely, especially for your first one. Who would you say that this event is geared toward? Because, for example, like Dark Odyssey is kind of this, or used to be in the years gone by, the spiritual kinky event. And Great Lakes Leather Alliance was the leather BDSM events. What is your events? Who's it geared for?
So we're going to attempt to be geared for a lot of people as we find our feet. One of the things we initially were going to go with was more of a 101, 201, 301 style classes, but we kind of expanded a little bit on that. So we have every round of classes, we're going to have an impact class of some sort, a relationship, whether it be poly or dynamics type of class, as well
Mhm.
as as well as a shibari class. Then we'll have things like fire cupping, knife play, very hypnosis. Not saying that you're teaching hypnosis or anything, but
Neat to see that there's a mix between some of the edgier stuff and stuff, the tried and true type stuff.
yeah, that's important. Is especially as we're finishing up the class schedule. Is my goal as a sadist is to make all of our attendees look at the classes and go, but I want to go to this one and this one, but I can't. But I want to go to this one and this one, and I want them to have that problem throughout the entire weekend.
That's a good problem to have.
Yeah, it is. Well, it sounds like you guys have got a great foundation. It sounds like it's coming together fantastically. I know that as someone who's coming to present for you guys, it feels like you have a very professional take on all this.
Mhm.
One more question for you, if you don't mind. Did you take the following Monday off work?
So the beautiful thing is the following Monday is a federal holiday.
Ah,
So
good.
so many people have that day off.
That is
Nice.
pretty smart. Exploration into Kink is the event. It is in St. Louis on November 15th through 17th. Keith, how can people get their tickets?
You can get your ticket through Forbidden Tickets. We are listed as one of the events.
And we're listed. It's listed under our name too, because you put our name as presenters. When they go to Deanna and Dawn, it shows up with my classes and that event's listed.
Should be easy for people to
Yes.
find. Dan and Dawn will be there. If you're a podcast listener, don't think you can't go to this event because you won't know anybody in the St. Louis, because you're going to know us. Come on out and hang out with us at this fantastic sounding event. Keith, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. And I look forward to you being too busy to say hi to me during the weekend that we're there.
I will be too busy, but I will not be too busy to say hi.
Fantastic. Thank you, Keith.
Awesome. Thanks.